Um, so yeah, I'm just going to begin by sharing my screen here now. See if I can get it up. So I'm broadly going to describe my practice within the context of a quote by Mark Fisher. So it's on from his book Flatline Structures, Gothic Materialism and Cybernetic Theory Fiction. So when talking about Gothic materialism, Mark Fisher describes it as fundamentally concerned with a plane that cuts across the distinction of living and non-living, animate and non-animate. It is this inorganic continuum that is the province of the Gothic, not the dead matter of conventional mechanistic science. On the contrary, it swarms with strange agencies. So within this text itself, Mark Fisher uses quite a few sort of case studies or points of analysis within the book. But for example, the ones that really sort of jump out from it, what I suppose would be focusing on William Gibson's Sprawl trilogy. That would be of the Neuromancer books, and science fiction such as films like Videodrome. And the works of J.G. Ballard, in particular, the book The Drowned World. So whenever I come to talk about my own practice, I usually sort of describe what I would be reading as well, and which does involve quite a bit of science fiction as well. But in my practice, I'm interested in how this eerie plane is manifested through different processes and materials. And this would involve the three main ones would be drawing, sculpture, and 3D animation. So when I'm speaking of Gothic materialism as a continuum, where the organic and inorganic coalesce into swarming strange agencies and entities, I visualize these as drawings depicting both lithic and biological traits, where they're swarming together and becoming quite indistinct from which point is the beginning or the end, or in fact that it's still reaching out and becoming. I call this series coalition broadly, in that they're united forms of material that come together, where each depicted object is in constant relation to its other, meshing together in a continual process of becoming. I often attempt to convey an uberotic concatenation of matter, living and non-living, where temporal states are in flux and tendrils branch out in a rhizomatic manner. So another point, starting point, I suppose, of these drawings as well, I would also drop in probably maybe Jeff Vandermeer's Annihilation trilogy. And in this book, there's a lot of quite odd creatures and beings, and which are difficult to visualize through the text. But I suppose maybe as a part of the drawings would be a process of realizing those. In the sculptural works, these concepts take on a more actual presence, whereby matter is imbued with a weird dark energy via hyper-capitalist processes of material extraction and commodity production. So in these works, I would often model them on industrial structures of mineral extraction, themselves often deriving from hardware stores that would be used in, I suppose, interior installation. By using materials such as thermoplastics, concrete, and bioresin, I'm attempting to create a direct link to these materials' properties and their origin, and this continual feedback of extraction, production, utility, destruction, and re-emergence as new entities. These structures of capitalist desire and material extraction are the manifestation of accelerated processes of reducing all living entities into the non-living, and vice versa, in a feedback process. It's a process that I would term Petrobios, which is a portmanteau word between Petros, i.e. the origin of the word rock, and biology. By using the speculative term, I'm also alluding towards mineral extraction in the creation of digital devices, where ancient stones and crystals are rendered into magical cybernetic objects that creates alternative or adjacent worlds in which they exist, which we're doing right now, I suppose. In these works, I'm interested in the idea of why these objects exist and their creation as tools for commodity production. What if there was another manner to utilize rather than perpetuating a dismal feedback of capitalist desire? Can these objects be repurposed towards an end that isn't directed towards the lowest common denominator of technique and total extraction? By asking these questions, I'm interested in older forms of tool production and use, where a more direct relation is forged between the human and the non-human. And on another point of probably talking about the extraction, which would probably twin up with what Busher was talking about, is what happens when these ancient deep recesses or zones are continually disturbed. So in the point, I suppose, talking about a trauma, that the deeper you go, the more traumatic it gets, digging into an unconscious of geotraumatics. Referring again to this concept of Petrobios with Gothic Materialism, I also make use of 3D animation software, such as Blender, to bring about these concepts into a more expanded speculative field. These 3D animations depict the transference of materials into other zones of production, conduits, filtration systems, and rendering machines. Again, in these works, an adjacent form of industry is at work, one that is not purely mechanistic, but is instilled with an eerie mythos and Promethean potency. So in each of, I suppose, in these animations, I'm more interested in building up more of a kinetic structure where it's easier to jump in between but different environments. Again, coming back into that very strongly speculative dimension. Again, using textures from photographs that would be of different surfaces. So of metal surfaces, concrete, earth, and other objects. There is a futurity, but also an antediluvian resonance, echoing the cries of extinguished and emergent entities. The objects in these animations act as conduits to bring forth a weird heterogeneous community. I mean, certainly throughout my works so far, as I've described it, and even with using the quote by Mark Fisher there at the beginning, there's very strong PHP Lovecraft themes at work here. However, I would draw a distinction between Lovecraft as a fear of the outside or otherness. It's to say that my work or my point of interest and where Mark Fisher would be talking from is to say that it's not on a fear of the other or the outside, but that it's an affinity or an effect for otherness and the outside, and how that can be used to rally other means of existing, living in a world that is perpetually in increasing crisis. In most of my works, I'm interested in objects acting as some kind of cipher or as totems that can open up these thresholds of other forms of things. I suppose also it opens up some sort of gateway to an outside that is unknown. I think I stopped that there. So now I want to talk a bit more about a recent project that I was working on, which was a residency in Tokyo, Japan. So yeah, it was quite odd, really, I suppose, because this was between March and April, at a time when COVID-19 in the West, as such, in Western Europe, was just taking hold and running rampant, where I was on the other side of the world experiencing this. But it's to say that during my time there, I was very much drawn to the edgelands of the city, derelict zones, and paths followed by railway tracks, industrial sites, and liminal zones where the city's controlling forces were strangely absent or collapsed into ruin. And this was more, I suppose, a bit of a change of tack for me, in the sense that rather than being involved in a studio-based practice, I was building up research by walking on these, just drifting through the city in a sense, without any particular aim, allowing the city to take me, open up a path for me, and encountering these little strange details within a city, which is usually quite regimented and ordered, that you come across quite eerie, weird zones. The drifts through the edgelands of Tokyo informed a series of drawings I produced during the residency, again under the Coalition series. However, in these works, there's more distinct objects that would be described as industrial, such as traffic bollards, air conditioning units, storage tanks, electrical cabling. Objects that would be used for utility objects that would be used for transferring energy, water, gas, fossil fuels. I was also beginning to produce a series of 3D animations that would culminate in a 4-part video series that was planned to be for exhibition. However, I was unable to complete this project due to the worsening COVID-19 crisis and returning back home to Ireland. However, during my return, I was placed under a 14-day quarantine period. However, that gave me time to reflect on the materials that I had accumulated during my time on the residency, which has most recently come about in this work called GCANS, which is a acronym for the Metropolitan Area Outer Underground Discharge Channel in northern Tokyo, which is a huge facility that designed to carry overflowing rainwater from the center of Tokyo out in the surrounding bay area. So I think I'll just show a clip of that. Okay. And I'm not really too sure what to add to that really for what I've said already. So I think I might leave it there.
Thank you, Gerard. Very interesting. Let's open up the discussion for questions and comments. Okay, I can ask a question, Gerard. When you're talking about the altered states as regimes of imperceptible, is amalgamated, interwoven to formulaic, manufactured, what kind of world are we looking at? How is it different from our world, and how is it similar?
I suppose I probably would be saying that it is the world that we do live in currently, in forms of, whenever considering, I suppose, mass production and global trade currently, in the stakes, that everything is considered under a rule of technology, essentially, and that nothing can exist outside of it, seemingly, or as it would be seemingly said to be. However, I suppose it comes back more down to, I suppose I'm thinking of Heidegger's idea of the sort of the broken tool or something like that. What is it whenever it's broken? It has no value. But it's that it still does exist. It's thinking, I suppose, more of the components of what makes it a tool. What are the materials? In that it doesn't stop existing just because it's broken. It's still there. Yeah. I don't know if that answers the question, but yeah.
No, it does. It's a very interesting answer. So it's in our world. Very cool. Any questions? If not, I have another one. Okay. When Mark Fisher says it is not a matter of speaking the unspeakable, but of vocalizing the extra linguistic or the nonverbal, and thereby letting the outside in, do these levels of language matter in your process? Does the organic and inorganic continuum relate to the language in this sense?
Well, I think, I suppose, it's quite hard for me to actually sort of place that. I find that quite difficult to sort of see or talk about where the point of language actually exists in this. In that a lot of the work that I would be making is non-verbal as well. I suppose, like, I find it quite difficult to actually articulate what I'm trying to explain, I suppose, with the work, and that I mostly I am making it in a non-verbal sense, and that's it's quite difficult for me even to apply any particular term to any certain object, because it can exist in multitudes. It's hard to sort of pinpoint any singular distinction for it. But maybe it would be to sort of describe more about sort of how these ideas are explained through science fiction. In that sense, like in referencing Jeff Vandermeer's Annihilation trilogy, there's always points in it where characters are a loss for words to actually explain what is happening. So, and even in terms of trying to describe it, it's always through similes. It's like something, but it's not that, if you know what I mean. So it's like a shimmer, but it isn't, you know. So I suppose in some ways I would I would probably say it's a similar thing with my own practice with the where language resides in that. I'm probably a bit I'm a bit sort of like, I don't want to put any particular categorization on what the objects would be, even though that I would be working with quite specific materials, especially in sculpture. It's more, you can say, yes, this is concrete, this is steel. But whenever it comes to, I suppose, the more speculative drawings or the animations, it's a bit more difficult.
Sorry, I don't know who that was. You could go first.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, I just want to say thanks for a really interesting talk, Gerard. I was just wanting to pick up on something you were saying earlier about the kind of the sort of Heideggerian technology framework, basically, because that would like imply there was some kind of like some sort of technically inclined creature with some kind of agential direction for its tool building built into it, and I thought that was interestingly absent from your work, and that might just be the point, that this is the eerie absence for your technology, is that it's the creature, the techne, the ethos of technology itself is somewhat absent, and I was wondering if that is the point, or if or what your thoughts are on that very conspicuous absence of this technology without an agential property, or an agential directed to it.
Yeah, I think that's probably you've got it there. You're right in sort of thinking that it's imagining a technology without any dominant agency driving force behind it, in that it's largely unconscious, that it works not by any singular motivation, in that it's not an intelligence as such, but more that it's through, I suppose, a morphology or something like that.
Okay, great. Just to follow up on that, then, is like, so what is it then that makes this, like, how does it become technology? Because that seems such like an overdetermined concept in relationship to that agential property, or like what space opens up. Like, is it some sort of? I mean, obviously, it's like this really interesting form of non-organic life, we could say, but yeah, what does this concept of technology in that do?
I'm not really too sure, and sort of what's, and whenever it's sort of distinctively talking about technology, I've kind of like sort of think about it in a reverse sense or something like that, almost, in that its use isn't determined in any such way as well. So I don't know. Yeah.
I think my question was somewhat similar, that I had typed in the comments, what is the purpose of the repurposing, in your sculptural work? It looks like the sculptural work has some type of a function in a manufactured kind of way. Like, it looks like it wants to be doing something or creating something or making something. And it makes me think of, I don't know if you know of Mika Rotenberg's work, where she actually has the videos and these very interesting contraptions, where you're cutting fingernails and squeezing them in, and then this juice comes out. It just doesn't really necessarily make sense as to what it is. But, I think you answered with saying you're not quite sure, what the function is, I guess.
Yeah.
You're more interested in the assembling.
I would say that, in talking about the utility of it, is that there isn't a utility, in the sense that even though that parts of them are modeled on industrial machinery or something like that, but in that I would distinguish them as sculptures. But it's always with the materials that are used in it that I'm always, they would be listed they would be categorized whenever the works would be on show as well, to sort of say that it's not mimicking or something. Yeah.
I mean, and then when you talk about dark energy, I wonder if you've read Dark Matter as well too, the Crouch
Yeah.
book. Yeah. And I mean, and I could see in your three-dimensional work some kind of reference and point to multiple existences. Is that something also that might be inspired or being pursued, or?
Yeah, I think sort of whenever, as I explained, I'm always interested in the properties of the materials and what they do as well. And even sort of in reference to that, with some of the works, I would have replicated them in 3D animations as well, so that they are actuated through that as well. So, yeah.
And it's interesting that you shared the work during quarantine, because I was thinking about the outside and the fear outside that we're all experiencing, and you were actually experiencing there in quarantine, and how that would then affect your work moving forward. It feels like we're in a science fiction movie.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Yeah, I think I wouldn't just say this for myself, but yeah, no, it's a very, especially with, I suppose, what I've been speaking about on the point of where I would be making work from. Yeah, it's very bizarre. Yeah.
I love Videodrome as well too. It creeps me out every time, no matter how many times I've seen it.
Likewise.
I don't VHS tapes around here. Thank you for sharing everything.
Thank you.
Looks like Arya has a question. Arya is asking, hi Gerard, how do you think the production of an artwork already requires the infrastructure which is ran by capitalist structure? Are you demonstrating the absurdity by actually adding to and exploiting the condition?
Yeah, it would be working within the absurdity of the condition. But also, yeah, it's as a means of trying to find an exit point as well, I suppose, which it's very difficult. And even maybe sort of like an art practice wouldn't be necessarily the right way to go about it. But I'm interested, I suppose, through the morphology of what what forms come out of it as well, and what the properties of the materials do, especially whenever they're over-the-counter purchased, especially.
If there aren't any more questions or comments, we can move to our last presentation for the day.
I'm okay with that. Thanks very much.
Okay.